Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's SCORE Fairfield County live webinar entitled Digital Marketing, Do-It-Yourself Digital Media. This webinar actually was done earlier this year and it was extremely popular, so we brought it back a little bit earlier in cycle than we normally would. It was very, very popular. I'm Steve Smith, a webinar coordinator here at SCORE Fairfield County, and I'm going to be your host, and the presenter today is going to be Bud Freund. I'll tell you more about Bud. Some of you know him, actually. I can see from your names. But I'll tell you more about Bud in a minute, but first just a little bit on SCORE. And many of you know this, but we're a part of the U.S. government Small Business Administration, and we've been in business since the mid-'60s, helping small businesses get started and flourish. There's more than 11,000 volunteers nationally that are a part of SCORE, and in Fairfield County we have over 130 volunteers with various degrees of industry expertise, process expertise, and deep subject matter expertise as well. We really have three primary value-add kind of platforms that we offer. I think it really comes, a lot of it comes to you through our website, which lists and makes available to you various resources, tools, and answers to frequently asked questions that you might need to start your business, to run your business, how to put together your financial statement, how to help your financial state run your business, how to do pinpoint marketing, almost anything you could imagine to get your business started and to make it run better. We also offer a series of workshops and webinars. This is obviously a webinar, and we offer webinars usually two webinars a month, always on Tuesday, always between noon and 1 o'clock. We also offer workshops throughout Fairfield County, primarily at libraries, but sometimes at other venues as well. In fact, we're going to be next month at Datto Corporation on Route 7 in Norwalk, using that venue for a workshop. The workshops are face-to-face, as many of you know, and tend to be 2 hours in length as opposed to the webinars being 1 hour. And the other thing we offer, which is really probably our premier service or value-add service, is one-on-one counseling. Usually that takes place in our offices at 111 East Avenue in Norwalk, where you'd have an individual counselor with an individual topic that pertains directly to you, and you'd dive right into it and hopefully get your solution. Now, back to the webinars, because that's what we're talking about here today. A little bit of it, for those of you that are familiar with our webinars, we're doing a little bit something different here. The next 3 Tuesdays, including this one, we're going to have webinars. I just got finished saying, in fact, we're doing them every other Tuesday, but for reasons I won't go into because it'll be boring to you, we're going to have one today, one on the 30th on protecting your data. And on the 23rd, I'm doing this backwards. On October 23rd, the subject will be the latest and greatest in 2018 tax actions, things you can do now to prepare for the April 15th next year. You've probably already received some marketing information on that, as it's only 1 week away. Also on 10/30, October 30th, protecting your data, which is extremely topical as always. So you'll be getting additional marketing on information on those events. And of course, you can go to our website at fairfieldcounty.score.org anytime to get a full list of the webinars that we've done and that we will do in the future. So today's event's has already started, obviously. It's being recorded. Important point, this is always a question I get. But it is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org later today. We set aside time at the end of the presentation, at the end of Budley's presentation, for Q&A. So if you have a question, please log it down in the chat window there in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and I'll moderate those questions, probably starting about quarter on and something like that. Now, Bud Freund. Bud's been self-employed for over 40 years. He graduated from Ithaca College as a photography major. So, when we're talking about digital images and digital media, Budley basically has been there during the whole conversion from film and to digital. So he's got a very, very good perspective on this. His clients
and his hair is very gray.
Well, you can't see him, but it's actually not as gray as a lot of people's. But anyway, his technical expertise is, has kind of migrated to multimedia and digital imaging. He focuses on small businesses, computer support and training. He's a frequent SCORE workshop and webinar presenter. He's a certified SCORE mentor, and he's also my partner on this webinar program and has been for the last 2 years. So I'm going to turn it over to Budley now. And again, put your questions in the lower left-hand corner. We'll get to them at the end. And I'm going to turn it over to Budley now. Budley, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome all. Nice to be visiting with you. I want to let you know, first of all, that I'm breaking this into 2 pieces. The beginning of it is going to be a review of some of the stuff that I have talked about previously, but there's a huge amount of information, so based on the complexity of it and the confusion of it, feel free to throw questions, feel free to ask things, and then we'll actually try the high wire act without a net and do some screen sharing, and I will try to create a digital image for you as we are speaking. So first and foremost, it's important to understand that this entire world of digital imaging actually did start with Kodak and the federal government, who asked Kodak to figure out a way of putting a camera into a satellite so that they could look down on Russia and China at the time and see what was going on. And Kodak understood it's very hard to get a roll of film out of a satellite and into a 1-hour photo, so they came up with these chips and digital imaging, and once the copyright or the patents wore out, they were able to proliferate to many, many different companies, and unfortunately Kodak never kept up because they were basically fighting this film and paper and chemistry business against the future of no film, no paper, no chemistry, and digital imaging. So they were caught in a very difficult place to be in. Anyway, that's where it started from. What you get when you shoot a photograph is a file, and the file that you get is basically created from dots, red, green, and blue dots. And depending upon the color value of the dot, you will end up with a particular color. Now, one of the things that Kodak created to try and bridge between their film and digital worlds were something called a photo CD, which never took off very well because they could never explain what it was and what it did. However, it created a huge file, and it also created very small files, and it retained the character of the image in each of these different resolutions. So the largest in a Pro CD, as you can see up here, was a very, very big file. It's 72 megabytes. You can reproduce a Vogue magazine cover from 72 megabytes, and only people who are really deep into printing and imagery would look at it and say, maybe it's not a perfect scan. For the rest of us, it would work perfectly fine. From there, it would go down to a slightly smaller file at 54 megabytes, which, and we will go through this in a little bit, as you start to alter the sizes of the image, the 54 megabyte component remains the same, but it's kind of like silly putty, where you can stretch it in different directions and end up with something different. In other words, you might want to make it taller, you might want to make it wider, but the 54 megabytes remains the same. You'd then move down to a multimedia file, which for slideshows such as this, images like this red and blue thing back there, they're not very large. And part of the reason for their being small is so that when you put them into PowerPoint, they will travel quickly. One of my older jobs in the early days of multimedia work was going to a paper company where they couldn't figure out why their PowerPoint wasn't running well, and it turned out that they had taken the portraits of the executives at 54 megabytes each and put it into the PowerPoint and couldn't figure out why the brain in the computer couldn't churn this thing and spit the images up on screen so quickly. We ripped them from 54 megabytes down to 1.5 megabytes. The show was running fine. And then we get to the Internet, where the smaller the file, and there is finesse to this, but the smaller the file you create, the faster it will travel onto a screen. And now that close to 65% of the viewing of the Internet is being done from mobile devices, the understanding of how to make a lean and mean image becomes really, really important, because if you don't get screen loading on a phone in 2 or 3 seconds, your viewer is going to go elsewhere. We will talk about image size in just a little bit. But there's lots of different file formats, and this was something I've gone through before, but in the mass and in the confusion of it all, I thought it would be of value to go through a second time. So again, Steve is going to be watching for questions. If you have them, fire away. I'm kind of focused on getting from point A to point B and happy to answer questions at the end. So, file formats. One of the originals is the TIFF, which stands for Tagged Image File Format. And in the old days of page layout, when there was a program called Quark, which may still be around but nowhere near the robustness of what it used to be. If you didn't have a TIFF file, you weren't going to be able to get from a computer to ink on paper. They don't compress, they're very large, but they retain a full tonality. GIFs, which will run on the Internet very nicely, are not particularly well gradated. In other words, you couldn't make a gradient from black to white without seeing the striations as you go through that. So GIFs work very nicely if you've got, for instance, some article that you're writing and you want to start it with a particularly unique or unusual font. You would create that first letter in Photoshop, or we'll use another program, but you'll create the letter as an image file, save that as a GIF. It becomes a very small load, and then whatever graphic layout you want to incorporate it into now becomes something where you can say, oh, what a lovely letter T, and you can structure the rest of your article around that. JPEGs, we all know and love. Most cameras are using those these days. They are pretty much a universal standard until the new iPhones, which are in a newer file format, and the name of it, I'm sorry, is escaping me. But basically Apple said, JPEG's been around for 20 years. We should be able to create a mathematical computation that can either make the image smaller or keep the quantity of color information in the file larger. And otherwise, though, JPEGs, there are varying gradations of JPEGs. The lower the number, a JPEG saved in a number 2 or a number 3, is going to look kind of ratty. If you've got a clear blue sky, things will start to pixelate and kind of fall apart. Think of it almost as having a pizza dough where you've stretched it too far and you start to see holes in it. So I am a very big fan of saving JPEGs as pure as you can. The higher the number, the better you're going to see the result. PNG is the evolution from JPEG into a file format that will provide the tonality of a JPEG, but the other thing that it will do is to offer the transparency of GIFs. And one of the features of a GIF file is that if you've got a black letter T or a blue letter T, it can literally be floating over whatever is on your page layout as opposed to a letter T inside of a white box or a green box, whatever color you might make. PNGs, you can do that same floating style with an image or a portrait or a person, or pick whatever you would like. The transparency of GIFs with the tonality of JPEGs give you a PNG. PSTs, that is the native Photoshop file format, which will open in Photoshop. It will open in other programs. It does do some compression. It does what is called lossless compression, so it does the mathematical magic of algorithms to take something that might be a 2 meg file when you open it and bring it down to 50K, 100K, somewhere in that vicinity, and then when you ask to open it, it will look at an image inside of the mathematics and say, oh, it's blue from the top left corner to the bottom right corner, throw all that blue back up there. And that's the mathematics of the image algorithms that people work on so hard. PICTs are similar in style to a TIFF. They are a PC-based image format. In the very early days of Windows, going up to, say, Windows 98, if you needed an image on your computer or you wanted to have a background screen, it was probably going to be a PICT. RAW files? RAW files are a very small file with a huge amount of information that higher-end digital cameras will create, but you will need software from the manufacturer to basically alter that image before it gets opened into a program like Photoshop. In other words, if you've got a really good Nikon camera, you can save in JPEGs, push it right into your computer. The JPEG will open in Photoshop or any other program and you're fine. If you save in RAW format, you will be able to fit more images onto the card that is storing your images. However, as you go through these RAW format images, you are going to need software from Nikon which will allow you to adjust color, adjust contrast, adjust what are called levels, the brightness and darkness of a given image, before it goes into Photoshop and then opens. And then photo CDs, which actually my current version of Photoshop no longer opens. So for those of you who might have photo CDs, do not give up your old version of Adobe Photoshop. I still have a version 7 which very happily will open a photo CD in any of the resolutions. So those are file formats. Now let's talk about channels, because here is again an area of massive confusion. Grayscale is a one-channel image, black and white, and that's it. There's nothing else to it. RGB, red, green, blue, those are the colors of computer screens. And depending upon how you vary the red, the green, and the blue, you will end up with a variety of colors. They are 3 different channels, and when you join them together, you can end up with whatever the image is that you've potentially worked on or shot. CMYK is the world of printing presses, ink on paper, cyan, magenta, yellow, and what's called key, or the black layer. And the art of printing is to take a single sheet of paper and literally run it through 4 different printing presses which need to be in registration. If you've ever seen an original proof out of a printing press, in the 4 corners are going to be a circle and a crosshair. And The job of a really good printer is to line those up so that everything lays right on top of one and the other. For those of us who used to collect baseball cards, when something got out of registration, if you have that card and it was, oh, I don't know, Willie Mays, you probably had a stupid amount of money and as a third grader had absolutely no clue of the fact. But CMYK, 4 different printing presses, one layer on top of another. And then NTSC was an older, what's called color space that was used for television. I am not a video person, and I could not tell you if NTSC is still in use. So much of the world of video and television production has evolved into computers and RGB. It's possible that NTSC is still a viable color space, but I would not be a good person to be able to give you an answer about that. So, when you go to create an image, and this has actually 3 different images that have been combined together. If we look at it, we've got the cell tower over here with the sunset. That was one image. That's sitting all the way in the back. These streaky lights here are a time-exposed photograph of a Christmas tree with a zoom lens. Put the camera on a tripod, long exposure, open and close the lens, and you get the streaking lights. And then the model who was on a cell phone doing a modeling shoot that we did on location. And you take those 3 images, you put them together, and now you create a single image. We will also talk about layers in just a little bit. But creating an image, there are 3 C's: crop, cook, and clean. The cropping, the smaller you make your image, the faster it will process on your computer. Whether it's cropping it down so that you get rid of the extraneous space to the side of your model, or it's cropping by changing the file size from 72 megabytes down to 50 megabytes or 10 megabytes, that's cropping. The cooking of this image, which we will again go through once we get over to the software, allows you to take what is an image created by a camera, whether it was a film camera and then scanned, or a digital camera, and tweak it. That's really all you're doing. You can adjust the brightness, you can adjust the contrast, you can make numerous changes once you get into image manipulation software. And then the cleaning, which is the retouching of an image, where you can either add or take out things that you either want or don't want. The easiest way to describe cleaning is that it is real-time cut and paste. If you were writing a Word document and you said, oh, I want that paragraph at the bottom of the page, not at the top, you'd select the text, cut it, put it at the bottom, and paste it. When you are doing digital image retouching, you are basically pulling from one side of your image and putting it down somewhere else in real time. So, hello, there we are. Before you get completely overwhelmed by all of this stuff and what digital imaging is and it does, I've been showing this image for many, many years, and what's important to understand about Adobe Photoshop version 6 is that I counted the names. It took 33 people to create this piece of software. So, what does this mean in plain English? If you know someone who tells you that they know all about Photoshop and all of its ins and all of its outs, you can tell them that they are at least 33 times smarter than any mere mortal. There is no way that any single human can know all of the pieces of these image manipulation programs. What a photographer does with Photoshop is entirely different than what a printer does with Photoshop, which is entirely different than what multimedia or web people do with Photoshop. So everybody's touching the same piece of software, but they're using it in a variety of different ways. Are we moving? Come on. There we are. So I've been saying Photoshop, Photoshop, Photoshop. Yes, Adobe makes an absolutely fabulous program. It is on the Windows side. It is on the Apple Macintosh side. I will tell you that you cannot run Photoshop faster than on a PC because of the incredible capabilities of key commands, but I will also tell you that there is nothing more elegant than editing an image in Photoshop on a Mac. Somehow that connection between mouse and software and image edit on the Mac side, it's just a dream to work in. However, there are other programs that you can use that will do the same sort of work, maybe not as elegantly, but they will certainly get the work done. One of them, and you'll see this in just a moment if all of my Highwire Act works, one of them is called PixLR, and it's a website where you can upload an image. You are going to need to have the Adobe Flash plugin running on your browser, but you put that PixLR on, you upload an image, you can edit it with online controls, and then you can download it back to your computer for use however you want. Photopea is another free website where you can do image editing. Just found that recently. All of these things, they take a little while to get used to and get familiar with, and truthfully, once you get the understanding of how to make one of these pieces of software work, there are people who like to know all about all the other ones, but if the job is to get the work done, learn how to do one and get it finished. And to that point, I did not include a piece of software called GIMP, G-I-M-P, the Graphic Image Manipulation Program, because given a choice between any of these others and using GIMP, I would rather hit my thumb with a hammer. That is my personal preference. I know people who live in GIMP and do great work in it, but it is not my choice of software, and I have a limited amount of time to do whatever I'm doing, and I want to get the work done, not learn a new piece of software. Unless, of course, somebody wants to hire me to teach them, I'll happily learn it and teach you. But otherwise, there are lots of other ways to get the job done. And today, later on, I'm going to be using Paint.net, which is a free piece of software that can live on your PC computer and will allow you to do, I would say for not particularly heavy lifting or fancy work, 80 to 85% of what Adobe Photoshop will do for you. And in today's world, by the way, the only way that you can get to use Adobe Photoshop is as rental software through the Adobe Creative Cloud program. And again, depending upon your choices of what softwares you want from Adobe, your bill gets adjusted accordingly. For instance, if you just get the image package, you get Photoshop, you get Lightroom, and you're done. If you get a larger package, you get InDesign, which is the layout program. You can get Illustrator, and as you keep adding more and more on, Adobe Premiere, Adobe is very happy to bill you more and more. But in the iPhone world, they will give you Photoshop Fix, they will give you Photoshop Express, they will give you Photoshop Mix, and they will give you Lightroom. However, you will need to have an Adobe account, and I do not recommend that in creating the Adobe account you use your Facebook username and profile. As we learned last week, you just don't want to be sharing all of that information in so many places. Create a unique user at Adobe, create a unique user at Facebook. I use Photoshop Fix very regularly. You can do some really good basic retouching in Photoshop Fix. Within a month or two, I've been reading reports that you are going to be able to get on your iPhone or iPad real, live, bona fide Adobe Photoshop. It will be the real deal. That's coming down the pike. So lots of choices for image editing, and we are now going to see what you can do in Photoshop. Isn't it just great, the things that you can do? So let me see if I can share out this screen now, and we can start to talk about the making of an image. And we're going to share over, and I am now in Paint.net, and hopefully you are looking at that. I'm going to rely on Steve to either chime in and say nobody can see it or people can see it. If I don't hear from him, I'm just going to keep going.
I can see it, so I assume everybody else can too, Budley.
Terrific. All right. This is an original, real live, bona fide image that was shot on film and scanned into a Kodak photo CD. I have opened a small image, and what we're going to do is take a look at the image size just so we understand what the image size is. And here we are. It is a 762 pixel by 512 pixel image by height and width. I want to talk about resolution for just a moment because it can be very confusing. Resolution is basically the thickness of your pizza dough. And regardless of what people may contend, there are two magic numbers when you go to deal with images on screen. A 96 DPI, dots per inch image, gives you a really nice, full, rich image to work with. That said, if you rip it down to 72 DPI, and let's watch and see if this happens. We change it down to 72, and numbers start to change. Did they change slightly? Well, we may lose some resolution here, but we'll change that down. And it will still look fine. Okay? So the smaller your image, the faster it's going to move online. I'm going to keep it this size, and we're going to start on the 3 C's of crop, cook, and clean. Now, as I said, Paint.net does not work exactly the same way as Adobe Photoshop. So if you are a Photoshop aficionado, you're going to see things being done differently here. And I have written my instructions out because every now and then I take a left turn when I should have taken a right. Let's start to go through this. So we're going to do the crop, cook, and clean. So the first thing is I'm going to select an area that I want to take out. And the way that we do it, does everybody see my little crosshair? And we left click, and you should be seeing the white going across. We're going to click and drag down, and I'm going to let go and talk about the where I've dragged to and the why. So there's now a white square. In Photoshop, they would be referred to as marching ants. I have taken out the black, which was from my 35mm slide, and I have gone right to the edge of where there is building and where there is land. And you'll see in a moment why we're going to do that. And if you looked up in the top corner, I went just to where the edge of black is, and I'm losing a little bit of my image over here, but I'm now going to go over to Edit. I'm going to go to Copy. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to New. And when you create a new file, the file is smart enough to know the dimensions of what I have grabbed. So right now I've got 736 by 382. I'm going to say OK, fine. And now I'm going to go Edit, and I am going to go Paste. And now I have a new image. And I'm going to go back to my old image, and I'm going to close it so I don't blow it up and I don't have a problem. And I don't want to save any changes to the old image. Now I've got only my new image. Okay? And before I do a whole lot of extraneous work to create something new, I'm going to do my other 2 C's, which are cook and clean. So what is cooking? It's a buzzword that I've been using when I teach for years. So you're going to go into Effects. You're going to go to Photo. You're going to go to Sharpen. And hopefully if you watch closely, and I'll over-exaggerate so that you can see this, watch the dots for all the lights, because they will change. Let's move this up a little bit. We'll move it up to here. We'll say OK. And now we're going to go Edit, Undo. You'll see a little bit of softness, Edit, and Redo. Now, one of the things that I love about Photoshop and image editing programs is this thing called history. So many of us would love to be able to wind back what we did in our youth and go through and do it again. Photoshop image editing programs, one of the few places where you can go, oh, was that a mistake, and go back to the beginning and start over again. So we've sharpened our image. We've done the cooking. Now I want to do the cleaning. And for the cleaning, we're going to use this thing called the clone stamp, or the cloning tool, which, as I said before, is basically real-time cut and paste. Now, everybody see my little plus sign? And if you watch carefully, you should see a white dot kind of following around. We're going to adjust the size of that retouching thing, and to over-exaggerate so we understand. Everybody see the circle? My circle, if I were to want to pull from over here above the Woolworth Building tower, and I wanted to put that sky over here, it would be pulling a circle as large as you see. I don't want that big a circle. All I want to take out is this little crane that some guy was probably using to wash windows. I just want that to go away. So rather than using something so large, I'm going to go down to, let's say, number 10, and even that isn't big enough for me. I think we'll go up to, let's say, 15. And now you can see that the circle is just surrounding my plus sign. So in order for me to grab an area of color that I want to help make that crane go away, I want to look for something that's complementary to what I'm going to be retouching. In other words, if I grab color from up here and I want to put it down here, you're going to laugh at me and say that wasn't a very good editing job. So I want to find something that's similar. And we know where we're grabbing from because we press the Control key, and instead of a plus sign, if you look carefully, you'll see a little anchor that changes one of the symbols and says, that's the point that you're going to grab from, and you do one left click. And then you can let go of your Control key. And then you'll see that little circle, see it pulsing. Now I can go over to my crane. I do a click, it went away. I'm going to do another click, and it goes away. And now I have done the only tiny bit of retouching that I really wanted to do on this image. So I've done my cropping, I've done my cooking, I've done my cleaning. Now we're going to start to do the razzle dazzle. So we're going to go either Control A or Edit, select all, and now we will get marching ants around the whole thing. I'm going to go Control C, which is copy. Keyboard's faster than the mouse, folks. Always has been, always will be. So we did Control A, we select all, Control C for copy. We're going to do Control N, which is new. And now, as we said before, it is remembering the size of that image, and we're going to click OK. And lo and behold, we've got something empty. We've got a place to put our image. So we're going to go Control V for paste, but this isn't exactly what I want yet. I need to do some manipulation to this. So I'm going to go to Image, and I'm going to go Flip Vertical. Now I've got the second piece of this image that I'm going to be working on, but I have to go back to my original. because now I want to take that flip thing and I'm going to put it underneath it. Why am I doing this? I'm going to create a reflection of the World Trade Center in the water, which cannot be done in real life because rivers never stop moving. So a lake will stop moving, but you can't do this to a river. So, more importantly, right now I got to have a place to put this image, and I don't. So we're going to go over to Image. We're going to go to Canvas Size. And now if you look at these squares here, I can tell my image where I want the original image to be and where I want the image to grow. And I could put it in a corner. I want to put it at the very top, and I am going to grow underneath. And I'm going to grow underneath height times 2 because I have the exact same thing and I just need to double it. However, before I go here, I'm going to do one other thing because I always forget to do this, and it's very important to remember. We have our color wheel over here. And right now my foreground color is going to be black, and my background color is going to be white. If I grew my canvas, I would have a white background, and I want a black background. So this little curvy thing right here allows me to swap the colors, and now black will be the background and white will be my foreground color. Now I'm going to go back to Image. I'm going to go back to Canvas Size. I'm still going to be in that top middle. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to multiply by 2, and it's going to be 764. 764. I'm going to click OK. And look at that. I have grown the canvas of my image. So now, what am I going to do here? Well, now I'm going to go back to my upside down image. I'm going to Control A. I'm going to Control C. I'm going to go to the image that I am working on and manipulating, and I am going to go Edit, and I am going to paste into a new layer. And now if we look here over on Layers, we can see, just like sheets of paper, I've put one layer on top of another layer. And I can rename my layer. And I can call it Reflection. And now I'm in my Mover tool. I can take this, and unfortunately Paint.net does not have the same constrain tools as Adobe Photoshop. Hold the Shift key, it goes straight down. However, we can move by arrow key, and we can move everything so that it's right in place. And because I have a black background, there's a slight bit of fudgeability. As you can see in history, I've got all of my movements here. That's all the work I've done to the image so far. And I'm not done on that bottom part, but I can turn it off if I need to find something. I can turn it back on. No reflection is ever the exact same color and brightness as what it is reflecting. So I'm going to go into Adjustments, and I'm going to go to Brightness and Contrast. We'll take that out of the way. I'm going to, I'm on the background. I'm in the wrong place. You can get very confused in layers. We're going to go up to the reflection. We're going to do that again. Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. And now we're going to be adjusting correctly. There we are. Now my reflection is slightly darker. We'll take a little bit of the contrast out so it looks a little more realistic. And we're going to click OK. Now, I can go into, because I don't want a perfect reflection, I'm going to go into Effects, and I can either go into Blur, and I can do some blurring. Maybe that's a little too much. We'll back it off. We can go by 1, and we can click OK. We can go into Effects. We can go to Artistic. We can go to Oil Painting. Oh, that's way too much. Nobody would believe that. So we got to back that off, and we're going to change the coarseness so that we get the feeling of a painting. And then we're going to click OK. And now I'm going to go into my background up here, and I'm going to do a little bit more adjusting. And the first time I created this image was about 2 days after 9/11. And what do you do in order to make this as memorable an image as you can? And this will be very rough, folks. But you basically take your Control key. Well, let's start over here. We're going to take our Control key. Oh, I am still selected in the other image. We're going to Control D and deselect. Now I'm going to take my Control key, and you can make the towers, unfortunately, go away. And as you're doing this, it's very short clicks, because otherwise, if you go too far, and we'll go backwards here. Let's go to there. I've given myself a new lease on life. Let's try it again. I want to show you what happens if you don't do short clicks. What happens is that you go down, and then you start adding the bridge. Oh, I don't want to add the bridge. I just want to take off tiny bits. And I've taught this to 6th graders. So now you've gone through there, work your way through. You can add text. You can do however you please. And now you get to the back end, where the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to flatten the image. Where is my flatten image? Merge layer down. Where did my flatten image go? Layers. Oh. I should have a flatten image somewhere. There it is. Images. Flatten image. And now we have something that will be able to go into File, Save As, and a bunch of different choices. If I had kept my layers, I could bring this image back into Paint.net and be able to do multiple manipulations. I can still, because I haven't carved this into stone, I could go back into my history over here. I could unflatten it, keep my layers, save it in Paint.net language, and be able to continue manipulating or doing whatever. And at this point, we're going to save it because we know the tonality is good in a JPEG. We're going to save it in a JPEG, and I'm going to save it on my desktop. I'm going to hit Save, and here is where you can adjust how large a file. And right now I'm at 435K. If I dial it down, I could be at 36K, but it's going to start to look like pizza dough that's been stretched. So this is where you get to adjust the quality of your image, which, as you're dealing in websites and web pages, you want to do a balance between the two. And we'll leave it there. We'll hit Save. We'll hit OK. We have saved our image. And what can I answer for anyone?
Hey, thanks, by the way. So I was encouraging you folks to ask some questions here. I don't see any sitting there right now, but we do have a moment. I know a lot of this went very fast. But take a moment.
And remember, folks, this will be online. You can look at this multiple times. Help yourselves.
And that, again, should be by the end of the day. You should be back online. Oh, so actually, we do have a question here from Dave Thum. Paint.net is not a website. Is this a standalone program for purchase?
It is free. It is downloadable. It is available for Windows computers, not Apple computers.
No? That was too easy of a question. How about a hard one?
Okay. Will you offer Adobe Photoshop in your workshops? I haven't broached that for two reasons. One of them being that I can show Photoshop, and for people who use it and you want to sit there and take notes, it works. The digital imaging workshop that I have done through SCORE, and apparently will be doing again in the very near future, is done at the Ferguson Library, where they have a really fabulous computer lab. And they have been gracious enough to install on their computers Paint.net. So you are able to go to the Ferguson Library, use their computers, touch Paint.net while it's going on, experience the frustration and confusion in real time, as opposed to those of us who have been invested in Photoshop. I started in Photoshop 2. They are now up to, I believe, Photoshop 15. In the days that I started, before I was as fluent as I try to be now, I would start to work on an image, I would watch the slider bar, and I would wash the dishes. Then I would come back and I would look at my slider bar and I would clean the bathroom. And then I would come back and look at the slider bar, and I would tell you I had a spotlessly clean apartment, and it took me a little while to figure out that the smaller the image, the faster the cook time. But in the early days of Photoshop, there weren't a lot of places to get courses, and most of us were doing it as trial by fire.
Hey, by the way, we've got a couple of questions here. I want
Go ahead.
So Jan asked the question, can you talk about the resolution? Actually, it's a statement. Can you can talk about the resolutions for print and web?
Sure.
You talk the resolutions for print and web?
Yes. For web, you're going to want an image that is small. And if you go into either Google or DuckDuckGo and type in dimensions for web banner ad, they will tell you whether it's 120 by 32 pixels or whatever their magic numbers are. And there are very specific numbers that you need to create these image sizes in for Facebook or banner ads. It's become a very regimented file format. Those are going to be very small files, which if you tried to print them, it would just sort of look like what's called rasterized. They'd basically be like silly putty that's just been pulled so far apart you can't figure out what the picture is. When you're dealing in when you're dealing in print images, understand that most of your manipulation is going to be in the 3 channels of RGB, red, green, blue. So let's say you wanted a 3-inch by 5-inch space for your image. The general rule of thumb for printing is a 150 line per inch dot screen. In order to get 150 line screen, you need to be at 300 dots per inch. If you had a 120 line screen, you'd need to be at 240 dots per inch. So whatever your printer is using as the screen, and the finer the screen, the better the reproduction, the higher the number for that resolution of the image is going to be. For instance, if you've got a printer who's doing an art book, they could be at for an arbitrary number, a 200-line screen, in which case the image that they would want to go into the printed piece would have to be at 400 dots per inch.
All right, so that's actually touching on Martha Yaney's question at the bottom there, and I just want to make sure we might as well just answer that one at the same time, since you were pretty much on that point. I think you may have answered it actually. She says, how do you adjust your inkjet results to come out correctly when printing probably on a commercial laser jet?
Okay. I'm going to answer this in a very broad way because, again, the people who do this stuff for as many years as I've been at it will talk about calibration. Okay? My computer is calibrated, and I used to go in and talk to art directors who would tell me, well, this thing is calibrated, and I'd say, to what, for, where? And they would look at me like I was speaking a foreign language, because they would have a proofing machine in their office for which there is one set of calibrations, and then they would be sending it off to a printer who's got an entirely different set of calibrations. So the specific answer to commercial inkjet printer, and I do recommend a fellow down in Stanford, his name is Steve Seifert at Speed Printing and Graphics. He's got a beautifully large Hewlett-Packard commercial inkjet printer, and he's got a fellow named Chris working for him who just makes it work really well. Chris speaks the language, and if you say to him, I need this thing commercially printed and I want it to be 20 inches by 24 inches, what do I need to give you in the way of a file size to do that? He will be able to tell you that for their printer, it has been calibrated to, and he will tell you whatever their magic numbers are, number one. Number two, the thumb drive or CD or whatever you send to Chris, please make me a 20 by 24. The only machine that sends images to that Hewlett-Packard is Chris's computer. And he has sent enough images, mine included, out of his computer to that Hewlett-Packard that, having worked with him a number of times, he can call me to say, you know that image of the sunset that you sent me? On my computer, it's going to print dark. So I can say to him, if you think it should be lightened, you have been touching that machine more often than me. I will trust your judgment to adjust it to a place that you think it's correct. So how do you set for a commercial printer? The broad brush answer, it will be different at every facility you go to. I would urge you to make friends at a single location, and it may take a few sheets of paper and it may be a while, but once you build a relationship at a single lab, single print shop, you will start to see consistent results.
That sounds like good advice. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. I want to make sure I get to this one question here that sounds kind of interesting. Tamara Strand asks, would it make sense or does it make sense to begin an image manipulation in the size you want it to be output?
Actually, a great question, and there are some people who would say, yeah, that's a good idea. My suggestion, having talked to people who actually do image work far more often than I do these days, is that if you, let's say you wanted to end up with an image on your website that's going to be 3 inches by 4 inches, and it can be at 72 DPI. You'll see how it looks. Let's say you start at 3 by 4 by 92. All right? Now, if the image that you do your work in is actually 3 1/4 or 3 1/2 by 4 1/4 or 4 1/2, you're a tiny bit larger than where you want to end up. What you're doing at the back end when you do this image alteration, the resizing of the image, it's kind of like a snowball where you're kind of crushing it in a little tighter and you get a firmer pack on the snowball. You're sort of doing the same thing to an image, and where I could not give you the technological explanation of all of that, why algorithms are throwing some numbers out and it looks better. I've chatted with enough people who say, start a tiny bit larger than where you want to end up, and your last step is the resizing down.
Okay. By the way, I'm going to try to cover the last two questions here.
Sure.
And one fell swoop here. So the one question has to do with some applications, and I'm going to PIXIR and PhotoP. Are these free, and are they downloadable?
Yes.
An Apple computer?
No. Pixlr.com and photop.com are websites to which you would upload your images, do your work, and then when you save it, you would save it back down on your computer.
Good. Got it. And then what about, is your choice, this is Dave Carlson asking this question, is your choice is not using Adobe and using a Windows PC? You had to make a choice.
I'll make my statement again. In Adobe Photoshop, you cannot move faster than on a Windows computer. However, there is nothing more elegant than editing an image on a Mac in Adobe Photoshop. Macs just, they play it, it just plays beautifully. The Windows computer, if you've got you've got the 4 images, and by the time you create a batch file, it's just easier to do the work. You can do that work, the rote work of open image, resize image, save image, faster in Windows than you can do it on an Apple computer.
Okay, all right, that's a good answer too. All right, last question. This is one that I'd like to hear the answer to personally myself. From Nancy saying, I saved a file as a JPEG and it was 96K on my computer. Why was my coworker seeing it as larger in size on his computer?
It will depend upon the resolution of the monitor. In other words, if your monitor is set to 1024 by 768, that's going to show images in one space. If your coworker is set at 800 by 600, you may have been looking at the nostrils on the person's face because they've just made the sizing of their computer monitor different. If the two of you have matching monitors resolutions set, whatever it is, 1600 by 1286 or whatever those numbers are, or put it easily, if you're at 800 by 600 and they're at 800 by 600, they're going to look the same. When you start shifting those resolutions, because those of us with bad eyes, we like things a little larger. It's easier to see. That's why it would look different.
All right, that's a good answer. Got it. Even I understand that. Okay, that's where we're going to draw the line here and cut this off. Great questions. And just a reminder that we are going to have, unusual for us, a webinar next Tuesday and the 23rd, and a webinar on the 30th as well on tax actions and protecting your data, respectively. So on behalf of SCORE, thank you all for attending today's webinar. Thank you very much, Budley, for presenting. And remember,
thank you for listening, folks.
And and remember to visit us at fairfieldcounty.score.org. You'll be able to get the replay information later today, and also you'll be able to see there all the other services that we do have to offer. Again, thank you very much, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.